I want to go back to you, Mr. Spears, for a moment, following on Senator Cortez Masto's questions about mapping. And again, we're talking about an infrastructure package coming out of the Congress that could potentially be huge, $1 trillion. I don't know. I don't know whether that's where we're going to end up, but right now there is a big focus, and rightly so, on aging infrastructure, inadequate infrastructure, and how we build it out. But again, knowing where to build it is important, and knowing that we have those resources that will then be required to build it are equally important. It was just a couple years ago, we celebrated with a big, ceremony and a hangar and cakes and balloons, the fact that Alaska was now finally 57% mapped. Now, I don't know where you celebrate 57% of anything, but we did it in Alaska because it's like, oh, we're just a little more than halfway there. But that's just that's mapping the terrain. So we got a long ways to go. Understanding and being able to inventory what it is that we have so that we move forward smartly with infrastructure is really important. So you've talked a little bit about some of the technologies that can help us more readily and hopefully less expensively identify this. But it seems to me that we could be in a situation where we're in such a hurry to get shovel-ready projects moving that we haven't done enough on the front end in terms of making sure that we've got good inventory, understanding, and mapping. Am I alone in my concerns there, or do you think we're doing okay?
You're not alone, Madam Chair. The fact is, the U.S. Geological Survey currently invests about $25 million a year of its roughly $1 billion budget in geologic mapping. A small fraction of that, about $5 million a year, goes to the states for cooperative programs and is matched by the states. It's a relatively small investment and something that means so much to this country. With just a modest increase in that program, we could rapidly accelerate the percentage of our country that is understood geologically in terms of its mineral resources and natural hazards.
Well, that's certainly something that we would like to continue the work, something that we've been leading on, but I think you're right, we need to be doing much more in that vein. Speaking a little bit about public-private partnerships, leveraging dollars, I think we recognize that we're in a budget environment where it's just tough around here. And as we saw from the skinny budget that was laid down, there's a lot in it that a lot of us really don't like because it's going to impact the programs and priorities that for many of us in our parts of the country are very, very key to our economy, but really key to our quality of life. As we talk about the infrastructure challenges on our parks and the public lands, we have done some things recently, specifically as it relates to national parks, with appropriations. Last year, we had the Centennial Challenge account, got a $5 million increase. ONPS got an increase of $43 million. This is where we do the repair and rehab as well as cyclical maintenance. So that was a 6% increase. The construction account received $112 million increase, which was an 81% increase. But even so, even with these small, and believe me, when we're talking about a $12 billion hole, it doesn't get us there. But we recognize that it's not just through the appropriations process, it's how we're leveraging, how we move towards these public-private partnerships. Within the park service, Ms. Argus, is there more that we can be doing administratively? I recognize that legislation around here is usually just a long time in coming. Is there more that we can be doing administratively to improve the infrastructure on specifically within the park service and greater areas where we can tap into this public-private partnership that perhaps we just haven't hit yet? You know, we've got the Centennial Acts Challenge Fund. I think that we can can look to. I don't know whether that is being accessed to the degree and to the extent that is most effective, but if you can comment on that, please.
Right. I think there are some things that can be done, but again, I will point out that they do need staff, right, to implement some of these ideas. Let me just start with, for instance, their volunteer programs. They could do more with that. If the volunteers are able to do maintenance programs that are more detailed, if they had volunteer coordinators in each region. Right now, they have one volunteer manager for the entire Park Service who's in the DC office. So it makes it difficult to leverage and coordinate all those volunteers.
Let me ask about that, and maybe Ms. Simmons, you might want to jump in here, because we had a situation a couple years ago where Forest Service budget down, they maintain cabins, Forest Service cabins that people can visit, and the community of Ketchikan saw that because of the budget cuts that Forest Service was proposing, basically dismantling some of these Forest Service cabins, and the volunteers said, hey, wait a minute, we can step in here, we can provide for the upkeep. And it seemed like a perfect fit. As it turned out, the hoops that a volunteer had to jump in order to qualify to be an acceptable volunteer to maintain these cabins, whether it was being able to demonstrate that you could safely operate a chainsaw, going through a safety course that most people would say, well, wait a minute, I'm an outdoorsman, I'm a woodsman, I don't necessarily carry my Red Cross card with me everywhere. But it was very frustrating to the local people because the agency was so concerned about liability, and the volunteer was, hey, I just want to make sure that this cabin is going to be there for us. Are we making things too complicated for our volunteers? Now, I appreciate what you're saying about the need to have somebody that organizes it. Absolutely. But is it working like we need it to?
So instead of, in this case, talking about volunteers, I'll talk about some of the partner groups and friends groups who do a lot of work and projects for the Park Service and provide funding. What we've heard is sometimes the paperwork can be a burden. They could do more if there wasn't that paperwork. Some of the friends groups don't have the staff to do that, or the friends groups themselves don't have that capacity. So that can be an issue that we should be thinking about. I do want to talk about opportunities with public-private partnerships. I think the Park Service really is trying to use public-private partnerships and agreements to address the backlog, but there are obstacles to that. In some cases, you have parks that have fantastic friends groups that can do a lot. In other areas, there aren't any friends groups. Martin Luther King Historic Site in Atlanta, it doesn't have a friends group. Or you might have regions where they have friends groups, but they're relatively small, and they just can't put up the matching funds, say, for Centennial Challenge projects. So those are issues. And also, to be frank, some friends groups or other partner groups and philanthropists just don't want to fund, sewage systems. They don't want to fund roads, and that's understandable. And I should also point out with corporate partnerships, there is a public perception problem. People hear parks, they hear corporate partnerships, and there is a concern that that's going to lead to a banner across Mount Rushmore. That is not the case. The National Park Service is working with the National Park Foundation. They're doing some great work with corporations, and we should be encouraging that. It is not going to solve all the repairs needed for infrastructure by any means. We're going to have to rely on appropriations, but we should be encouraging more of that type of partnership.
Well, and I think through the Centennial Act, we do have some opportunities there, but how we help shape and guide some of that, I think, remains to be seen. Ms. Simmons, can you comment on on what we can be doing to make sure that volunteers really do feel welcome, whether it's paperwork or whether it's the agency saying thanks but no thanks.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Well, I want to be clear that we do not work on structures. Our volunteers don't work on structures, and so I can't comment to the specifics of
But you
restoring
build
a cabin.
trails,
But we do
you-
build trails,
yeah.
and I think we can say quite definitively we think there's great power in using volunteers. And we've been fortunate to have nearly 25 years of a relationship with the Forest Service and our local forests to work out the kinks and to establish the relationships and the systems and the trust that works really well. I think that the key for us is really been understanding, we take anyone regardless of experience, but we have crew leads and assistant crew leads that have been well-trained and know how to manage volunteers. And so there's a balance between the expertise and the everyone comes to build the trails that can be developed. And we've been fortunate to work really cooperatively with the Forest Service to figure out how to make this happen in Washington State.
Oh, that's good. That's a good success story. I know people that have been involved with either establishing trails or maintaining trails over the years, going way back to my parents' grandparents' days in the Tongass, who still look at that trail and say, I helped make that trail. And there's a real sense of pride. The family says, yeah, that was my grandpa's trail. And that really does allow for great community buy-in and support for what it is that we're doing.
Absolutely.
Senator Cortez Masto, follow-up questions?
No, thank you.
Well, I want to thank each of you for your input here this morning. I think the hearing today has been very interesting, and following on what we heard last Tuesday, I think as a committee, we've got a great deal to work with when we think about an infrastructure proposal that can really help this country, help our economy, but also ensure that whether it is clean water, whether it is ensuring that our communities are safe from the threat of wildfire, whether it's how we enjoy our amazing open spaces, whether they are trails or parks or skiing, and making sure that these resources that we have on our land, under our land, are respected is a great part of what we do here in this committee. So everybody else is talking about infrastructure and what they can contribute to the package. I think within this committee, we have the most exciting part of that portfolio. So look forward to working with you as we help advance this. So thank you very much for your time this morning, and we stand adjourned.